Welcome to Real Deep Stuff. We've saved your seat at the table for this conversation. We're so glad you're here. This podcast discusses sensitive topics such as suicide and depression. Listening to this podcast may be upsetting to some listeners and may trigger unpleasant feelings or memories. If you are feeling overwhelmed or distressed, please consider seeking help from a qualified mental health professional before listening. The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It should not be construed as medical advice or a substitute for medical advice. Today we are continuing the conversation with Lindsey Lee as she walks us through her journey of life and loss with her husband from depression and suicide. We thank you, Lindsey, for stepping out and doing the uncomfortable thing and sharing the painful moments of your life so that you could hopefully help make someone else's pain a little less. Thank you. What strength did you draw from to speak at his service?
So like I said earlier, I wasn't going to initially speak at his service, but I really wanted, I think that's where like my passion for kind of being honest and open about, what happened and about mental health came from. I wanted to honor him and share with people like how great he was, but I also wanted to tell others like, if you are struggling with depression, it's okay. It's not anything to be ashamed of. And I think also just like wanting to be completely honest. Like I didn't want rumors spread about, him or, because people, people don't know how somebody died. It's like, oh, I assume he did this, or I assume he did this. It's like, here's the honest truth, and like take it or leave it, but I don't want there to be, stories being told about him like, yes, he committed suicide and he was struggling with depression, and I just don't, I think I learned, I was like, it's not anything to be ashamed of that you struggled with depression. Yes, I wish he did not commit suicide, but I want to use my circumstance and his story as like to help others. So,
and it is.
Yeah.
It is. Wow. Finding out that you were pregnant a week after his death. I remember reading a post talking about how you were packing your hospital bag and that you had to take his death certificate with you. I literally just bawled my eyes out at that moment. If it's okay, can you tell us what that felt like for everyone that's shares your journey?
So I had to like reach out to before I even, weeks before I was like, okay, I could maybe, go into labor around this time. I had to, I reached out to the hospital that I was going to be delivering at, and I was like, hey, so I know this is not a normal circumstance and a normal situation, but my husband passed away and I'm going to be giving birth around this date. What all do I need to like bring with me? Do I need to bring his death certificate so his name can be on her birth certificate? And they were like, yes. And so it's very weird. It's very weird. You're bringing, I don't know, almost like a death to a birth, and when it's supposed to be happy, But I knew that I wanted his name on her birth certificate because he is her dad. And it, luckily, like, all the, like, nurses and everything were super gracious, like, when we got there, and so, they were very sweet about it. But yeah, it was weird when it came time to, like, you know, have her birth certificate, them entering all the information, like having to hand over a death certificate. But I think at that point, I had to do so much, just in even other situations of having to bring his death certificate to so many things that it was like, here's another one. And it almost became like, not routine, but like almost expected that I was going to have to do that.
Because you had milestones, like you sold your home. I'm sure that was any type of legal or banking or whatever. I'm sure.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought to do that. That was incredibly forward thinking of you.
And I think when you're in that, we're in this situation where it's like, you know, your spouse has passed away, you almost have to be thinking ahead, of like different situations that could come up, and that the last thing I want to do is be unprepared and not have things ready, in case I need them. And I think it just brings like a peace to your heart when you're prepared for something versus showing up and like, oh no, I needed to have his death certificate. I think that's a whole nother like, oh my gosh, like I have to process this. And I think being able to like have that already packed and settled in this, like the realization, like, yes, I'm going to be handing over a death certificate at my daughter's birth. Let me feel that now, and then when I have to do it, I'm not going to be like in such, I don't know, surprise that I would have to do something like that.
Fully agree. I think when we have the opportunity to kind of almost pre-walk a road, we know we're gonna, whatever that road is, that initial shock and awe, we can feel that in our own time and space.
Yeah.
And then when we're going actually through it, there's enough of that emotion that's going to happen.
Right.
But just to kind of buffer it a little bit, it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a gift to be able to preliminarily feel all that in your head and your heart. Yeah. And she's born, and she has this beautiful name. Would you mind telling us how she got her name?
So Abigail got her name. I had not had my 20-week ultrasound yet, where you do your anatomy scan, and so I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that before that. And one morning, Emmy, who was maybe she was less than 2, she pointed at my belly and she said, "Baby girl." And I said, "What'd you just say?" And she said, "Baby girl." And I was like, "Oh, what?" And I was like, "Okay."
You're like, "How'd you know?"
Yeah. And then I was like, "Okay." And then the next day, she said, "Baby Abigail." And I said, "What'd you say?" She said, "Baby Abigail." And I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. You do not know anybody by the name of Abigail. You've never heard this name before. And I was like, oh my gosh, if you were right, this is so weird. And so when I had my 20-week ultrasound, they were like, "It's a girl." And I was like, oh my this is so weird. And,
so that's weird enough
yeah.
that she knew.
Uh-huh.
What makes it weirder?
So the name Abigail was one that David and I had considered when I was pregnant with Emmy. And we had not looked up the name, like what the meaning of the name, because we kind of had settled on Emmy. And so when I looked up the name of Abigail and like what it meant Father's Joy or Cause of Joy. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so perfect.
So there's three things working
right?
here. Emmy knew she was a girl.
Yes.
Somehow she knew this name that David and you had considered, and what the name meant. So you probably didn't have to buy a lot of name books.
Nope. So I was like, all right, it is Abigail. We are going with Abigail. The only thing I had to like think about was like, hey, well, what's your middle name going to be? But I was like, at this point, I don't even care. It's Abigail.
Yeah.
So that was like super special.
That will be a bond for the two of them forever.
Yeah. So it was very, very, very sweet, and it's probably something I will never forget, and I hope I never forget. But I think it's sweet that she was able to like be able to tell me that, and so yeah, that's really that is a sweet story. Yeah.
Wow. And it just connects Emmy and you and David and Abigail and God all together. That's really great. Yeah. So fast forward a little bit, what was going back to work like while you're now, everything has changed. Right. Same job, but like an entirely different backdrop to that.
Yeah. So I had, I think I went back to work in April. It might have been like end of April, I'm not even really sure. But my manager was super gracious. So I'm usually bedside nursing. And so I have patients and giving medications and all that. But she let me be what we call an admission discharge nurse. So I didn't have direct patient care. And I was pretty much just in the role of like helping admit or discharge patients. And so
that's great.
Yeah. I needed something that was not going to trigger anything and something that would allow me to like ease my way back into work. So she let me do that for about a year or so. I think like right after I came back from maternity leave with Abigail, that's when I started bedside nursing again. But it was nice to have something where I wouldn't have a possible situation of a patient coding or something like that. But I did still have like a situation where I did have a trigger where it was like within the first week or so, I think, of me coming back to work. One of the nurses had passed out, and the color of her skin triggered me of it was the same color that David's skin was when I found him. And so it was like it took me by surprise because I wasn't expecting to, have to face something like this so soon. And in that moment, I almost lost it, but I was like, I have to be able to control my emotions like I'm at work. And but like all my coworkers, they were like super sweet about it, and they were like, if you need to go cry, just go. But yeah, I mean, the other another trigger that that I had in the beginning was lights on, like if I can see a light shining under a door, that was triggering. Like when it's not supposed to be. Like if everybody should be in bed and the light is left on, that was triggering. And I had one time, and my youngest brother probably has zero clue because I never told him. But it was like I was getting ready to go to work and he had left a light on in like his closet or something, and I could see the light shining under the door, and I knew, I was like, okay, it's way too early for you to be up. You should be asleep. And I froze, and I started having like palpitations, and like my heart was racing, and I was getting so nervous, and I had to open the door, and I had to go check on him to make sure he was okay, because that's how I found David, was the light shining underneath the door. And I mean, luckily those have been the only triggers, and I've learned to work through those. And I think when you're exposed to something like a trigger so often, like it's a terrible habit that my brother has. He leaves the lights on. So now I expect a light on underneath his door. That you become desensitized to that trigger or that trauma. So I luckily haven't had to, haven't had instances where I've felt that again. But in the beginning, it was hard.
Triggers are so sensory. Sometimes they're memories, you know, but boy, they can affect any of our senses at any time, and it's so important to learn how to work through them ourselves. What would you say to, you know, friends, family, coworkers, you know, to other people? Probably be patient while that's happening. Like, any advice on that?
It's kind of hard because I don't think you really realize your trigger until you're faced with it. Like, I had a feeling maybe lights on under doors might be a trigger, but I didn't realize it was until I was faced with it. And honestly, I did not think that seeing a certain skin color and seeing someone passed out would have as much of an effect on me at first, which sounds like very dumb, but I, like I said, I didn't realize it would until it like slapped me right in the face, and it was happening right then. And I never really told anybody about really those two situations. Yeah, my coworkers were there when one of the coworkers passed out, but I think just giving that person just grace to like feel, and just maybe like the presence of a friend or a family just being there with you and letting you talk through whatever you're feeling and whatever triggered you, and hopefully bring awareness to those triggers, that maybe you're not faced with them. But I think you do need to work through your triggers, and I think it's not like I purposely am working through it, but I think because my brother keeps the light on on in his room all the time, I've had to just work through that, that it's no longer a trigger. And so I think giving yourself grace to know that it might hit you out of nowhere, and just allowing yourself to feel those feelings, even if they're so hard.
It's such an excellent point to say, to bring awareness to the trigger and give it a hot moment. because stuffing them
Mm-hmm.
does not help.
Right.
I think it's I'm not a psychologist, but
Right.
I think it's the way that our mind and heart are bringing up something
Mm-hmm.
that is
Mm-hmm.
tender and
Mm-hmm.
hurting,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, I need to heal this piece.
Yeah.
And then I need to heal this piece.
Right.
And not allowing that process to happen, I don't think leads anywhere
Right.
healthy or good.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
I agree.
great. That's
Mhm.
great that you can take your
Yeah.
moments and sometimes moments might be days, you know,
Mhm.
or it might be a
Mhm.
second. And
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And so, going back to work is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
How is parenting two on your own now? What does it feel like when Amy talks about dada in
Mm-hmm.
heaven?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what
Mm-hmm.
can you share?
So, usually when you have two children, it's usually like one parent has one and the other has the other. Well, I went from 1 to 2 and it's just me. But Abigail was like a super easy baby compared to Emmy, and she enjoys sleeping and napping. So like, there's just several areas where I'm just like, oh my gosh, thank you God for giving me a baby that like enjoys napping, and I'm not having to constantly be like walking a baby in a stroller, like just constantly having to go. But it's hard, because when you have two crying children, it's like, okay. But it's allowed me to, I think you really realize your strengths and your weaknesses when you're faced with them. And I think I'm a very like hands-on mom, and luckily with my job, I get to be with them more days than not, and so I have been able to be the mom. Because I always wanted to be not necessarily fully a stay-at-home mom, but I wanted to be home more than I was at work, and so with my work schedule, I do get to be with them, and so it's allowed me just to be there for them, but it is hard when it's, you have the constant demands of two small children, and they don't really understand mom needs a break.
Maybe you want to go to the bathroom alone once in a while.
Not have a toddler looking at me. And I realize, like, I get to the point where, and I usually don't realize this till it's like too late, but I definitely need to give myself a break, and I'm not very good about that. And even if that's, and I think this December really kind of brought awareness of that to me, that December was hard for me physically, not emotionally wise, as far as I was exhausted. I feel like I was running on fumes, and I think, you have the holiday season of, there's so much to do and see, it's Christmas time, and yeah, and I don't want my girls to miss out on stuff like that, and I think I got to the point where I was like, so much had been building that it finally kind of got to the head, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need a break. I'm not even really looking forward to Christmas. I am looking forward to January and the week between Christmas and New Year's. Just the lull of where you're home, you're not doing anything, and you're just, it's not necessarily quiet, but it's like you're not moving really. Mm-hmm. And I needed that so bad. And so right after Christmas, I think it was like New Year's Day, I had a former coworker come up to me at work, and she was like, hey Lindsay, I kind of have this on my heart to ask you, are you doing anything where you get a break, like a night away from the girls? And I was like, to be honest, I have not had a break from my girls in almost 2 years, like not a night away where I'm just by myself or like maybe with a friend or whatever. But I haven't had that time where I can just not have to worry about the girls, but just focus on myself. But in May, my mom and I were going to go to Europe for 2 weeks, childless.
Awesome.
And I am so pumped. I'm like, you don't realize you need a break until it's usually too late. And so I am at that
Oh,
point.
that's great.
Yeah, so I am excited.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes, keeping yourself on the to-do list is so important.
Yeah.
That's great. So circling back, we talked a little bit about grieving.
Yes.
And how stages can bounce around, or we could kind of get stuck in one for a little while or revisit them. How has the stages of grief worked for you? And has there been a place where you kind of got stuck?
Yeah. So, I think as far as like the grief stages, I mean, like I said earlier, it's not linear at all. And you can really like bounce from one to the other and not even really sit in one. And I feel like you can kind of feel two at the same time. And I don't think I've really lingered on one more than another. Yeah. I think the one I've spent the least amount of time in is the anger stage. But yeah.
It's staying fluid, just to kind of let it be what it is.
Yeah.
Letting yourself feel what you need to feel when you need to feel it. I think a lot of people might struggle with that. Like they might feel like they're dishonoring the memory if they get mad. Or guilt if they start to accept, and but that it's okay. I believe personally that God made us to survive, and the stages of grief help us have those tools of survival, right? Because you probably just, I mean, I can't speak for you, but part of you maybe felt like, you know, your life was ending too when his ended, and so there's plan and purpose for you, and I think he builds those stages of grief in us for a point and a reason. And when people push that down or deny it or feel bad about it, like not to feel bad about it.
Right. And I think you need to allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. And I think for a while I did push back, like not wanting to feel the anger stage of grief, because I mean, like you said, I felt like I was dishonoring him if I was angry at him for committing suicide, but knowing he was not in the mental state to like truly be able to make sound, logical decisions. But I think you have to give yourself the grace to like allow yourself to feel that, because it does at some point it does come up. And like for me, it came up when I had 2 sick kids and I was having to be up in the middle of the night for several hours just trying to like get children to fall asleep and just be angry at him. And it's healthy to feel the stages of grief, because if you don't, like you said, it just festers, and that's not good either.
Be it the anger or depression or bargaining, denying that can also, I believe, have ramifications on our physical health, not just our mental health or emotional health, but our physical. We can't, our bodies were not made to hold all that in. You know, we store emotional pain at the cellular level, and needing to leach that out is so important, so you can be who you need to be to yourself, to your girls, to your job, to your friends and family. It's so important. And I feel sad when people feel like it, you know, there's too much guilt or whatever other emotions holding them back from feeling like I can't be angry at them. And I have to say, like, I'm just profoundly impacted that you have the wherewithal to understand that he wasn't in his normal right thinking mind.
Yeah.
And I do think that you've done a lot of homework, but you also are way wise beyond your years. Because, you know, I guess my point is, like, someone could maybe get stuck in the anger without understanding the wider lens of, like, they weren't in their right mind.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because when David and I got married and we were dating, it's like I saw the happy, carefree David, and I saw that change over the years, that the David that had depression was not the David I know that was deep in there somewhere. And I think that has helped me, being able to know that the one that did commit suicide, and I know I'm like talking about it like one David versus the other, but I think the David that struggled with depression was not the one, or the David that did not have depression, and that was just deep in there somewhere, would not have been the one that would have committed suicide and ended his life. And it's like I have to believe that was in there somewhere, but it could not come to the surface.
It's almost like maybe he was living parallel lives, but one life just overtook the other, got stronger, the voice got louder. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he was a really goofy guy.
Yeah,
he brought a lot of joy to a lot of people, and I absolutely believe that wasn't gone.
Right.
But unfortunately, the other side of that got stronger. So you've sold your home, you're raising 2 daughters by yourself, and I remember the day I read about you taking off your wedding rings.
Yes.
How have you kept your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual self healthy through these changes and transitions? These are huge life, when they talk about the 8 life stressors, you know, like...
It's like all in like 1 year.
Yeah.
Almost 2 years.
And you weren't even 30. Like,
yeah. It was a lot. So for me, lots and lots and lots and lots of prayer. I think, like, for me, always getting outside has always done like wonders on just my mental health. So I have spent so much time outside, and I think it just allows me to think more clearly, because I think when I stay inside, it's almost like you're in this cocoon and you just fester on all of your problems that are going on, and you just spiral out of control and you can't think of the good. And I think being outside has just like really helped just allow me to like think way more clearly and just see the good of everything that God has put in my life, and the way things have like orchestrated themselves out. Like he had a plan, and I can see bits and pieces, and it might not be what I thought it would be, but I can see the good.
There's so much science behind getting outside. The endorphins from the sunlight and that fresh air. And I think we feel closer to God with nature. There's a different type of dirt. Like, dirt is good.
Right.
It's like I can handle going to a barn easier than a public bathroom, honestly.
Right.
It's just something natural about, you know. And it also, like you said, it gets you outside your head, which is so important. So just taking a walk, sitting on a front step, anything, just, that's a good piece of advice.
I think just letting the sun, like, sit and hit your face is like, you can feel warmth even when you're feeling cold.
Oh, that's
like,
good.
It's just,
Yeah, that's really good. What are some of the other things that have helped you? Like, I know over the last couple of years, you've mentioned songs or books. Have you had counseling? Whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So I went to counseling. To be honest, I went twice, and like I could have gone more, but having friends that have gone through like a suicide has really helped me the most, because I think you just naturally get to this point where you're just super honest and you can talk about like, yeah, this really sucks. Like, there's just no better way to say it. It's just, it sucks. But I think when you have somebody that's gone through this ahead of you, they can ask you questions, like deep questions, and it's almost like a built-in counselor a little bit. And so luckily I have these two best friends, and they're a couple, and we've talked about so much, and like we just have very honest and real conversations. And they ask me questions that like things that I haven't really thought about, but I'm probably subconsciously thinking them. It's like making me really like process. And then I found, since David died, other like young widows in the Charlotte area, and mainly one that she wasn't married, but she was soon to be married. And like I've kind of become, I think, that for her, where she can process stuff with me, and I get it, and she gets what I'm feeling. And so I think it's great to have friends also that are like not having, like, that don't deal with this, but I think you do a lot more processing when you do have friends that have gone through like a suicide. That's been like a real big way of how I've been able to process a lot of things.
So what I'm hearing is you're really gleaning from the support of people, friends who have walked the same journey, different, looks different, same type of loss, and then finding some strength in turning around and being able to help someone else that's coming behind you. Yeah. That's great. That is beautiful. Because sometimes people take their pain and they go home, and they're just like, I'm done. I'm cutting off society.
And I think like a lot also probably has to do with your personality type. Like, I am not one that I don't like to be. I'm not a pessimist. I don't like to like feel doom and gloom all the time. Like I want to feel happy, and I want to feel joy. And I think you learn, like, it was hard to learn, but you can feel both heartache and joy at the same time. And even though that seems so weird, it's possible. And I think I just have I just have a personality where I can do that. I can see how some might not be able to do that. But I think to like really process and go through your grief, you have to have something to look forward to. To move forward. You're not necessarily moving on, but you're moving forward.
Yes. One thing that I have said often in regards to losing my mom was, I'll never get over her loss.
Right.
You get through it.
Right.
And those are two entirely different things.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. You have spoken a lot about how helpful and beneficial your friends and family have been. Things like your dad moving things out of the office, and friends who've gone through things similar. Could you give, for people who are, a support system for someone in their life, could you just give a couple of do's and don'ts, even if you just like bullet list, like do this, don't do this, helpful, not helpful?
As far as do's, meal trains are like very great, especially in the beginning.
Meal trains, so like people bringing you food.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that's like one less thing you have to think about, and it's just there. As far as like friends and family, I think I touched on this earlier, but like just allow the person who is grieving to sit in their grief but be comfortable in sitting in that grief with them, even if you're not saying a word, but just sitting beside them. And you don't have to be like, oh, it'll get better. Don't say that. Because in that moment, you don't believe it, and you don't want to hear that. But I think showing up and being there for them, and honestly, like if I was still living in my house, I would want someone just to, like, if somebody would set up, like, okay, I'm gonna have somebody come clean your house on this day. Don't even worry, like, something you don't have to worry about. I'm gonna come take your kids for 2 hours. Oh, wonderful. Something just
go
like
change the oil in your car,
right?
Something. Okay.
If you can do something for that person that takes like a load off their shoulders, I think that does a lot. As far as don't not say anything. And I touched on this earlier, but the silence is deafening. It's already silent when you're expecting your spouse, to have a conversation with your spouse, and at night it's silent and you don't have anybody to talk to. But like when friends don't say anything, it's like a double whammy, and it feels even more lonely.
Can I give a really bad example
Mm-hmm.
of something that I just did this past weekend?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Of when okay, I was telling myself. So earlier you said their silence is deafening,
Yeah.
and I really get that. I think sometimes people are just tongue-tied as to,
Yeah.
I'm so afraid I'm going to say the
Yes.
wrong thing. So I was at a funeral,
Mm-hmm.
and I was walking through the family visitation line, and it was a little bit of a trek from our home, and I was just really grateful to be able
Mm-hmm.
to get there and be there to
Mm-hmm.
support them.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it was about me, it was just like I was so happy that it worked out.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to the family, and I just look and I said, I'm so happy to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And she just kind of looked at me and I went, that was so dumb of me to say.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just going to stop talking
Mm-hmm.
and move on.
Mm-hmm.
And I hugged and I just kept walking,
Yeah.
and I just walked away going,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I just said that. And so I think people are terrified to make it worse.
And I understand that. And I mean, like, honestly, before David passed away, I probably would have been the same way. And I think as the person that's going through the grief, I think you do have grace for that. Like, you understand, like, okay, they probably have no idea what's right to say and what's not right to say, and it is awkward. And I think I remember at David's funeral, as far as what you were saying when you say the wrong thing.
Please tell me I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one.
Okay.
So one of his friends, I don't even know who, I've never met this person in my life. He came up to me and he just said, I wish this and I wish that and I wish this, da 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 da. And I felt in that moment like I was having to shoulder his burdens, like he was unloading on me. And I was like, I don't have the capacity for this. And like, I should be the one that's able to do that to you, not you to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just did that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, as you go through your grief journey, you realize people, it's so hard to know what to say. And I think even just saying the words like, I'm here with you, or I'm here for you, I think that does way more than nothing.
Yeah. Maybe it's just the autism in me. Different funeral. 2 weeks before that, I'm there to support my friend who had lost her dad, and walking through the family visitation line again, and I had never met her brother.
Okay.
So here we are again in the line, and her mom introduces me to her brother, and I said, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you," in that normal, like, smiling, like, pleasantry thing. And he didn't say anything for just a split second, and it made me kind of, like, quickly, you know, like, oh, and I looked at his eyes, and I see, like, they're wet, and he's crying, and I realized, it's like I almost forgot.
But I think that's just such a natural way of how we just talk to people just in general. Like, it's like, hey, how are you? And I think it's just an automatic, like, verbiage that just comes out of our mouths when we see somebody, that it's, you don't realize it until after you've already said it. You're like, oh God, that was so not appropriate. But
and you think about it for days to come. Like, I went from going, oh, nice to meet you, and then I saw him and I went, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, and then I just had to move on. I was just like, at that point, there's no coming back from the awkwardness that I created. And so I guess we will follow your advice to just keep and then maybe if it provides a point of weird humor on the other side, okay, that's great, you know. But keep talking.
And I think, like, instead of people asking, like, what can I do for you? As the person that is grieving, you don't want to be the one that has to be like, well, I could use this and I could use that and this and this and this. You just want, I think, like how I said earlier, just do it and just tell me later, like, hey, I'm gonna do your laundry. Oh, thank you so much. I'm gonna clean your house. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's doing it versus me having to ask. Because I think that's when you feel like even more of a burden on somebody else, when somebody else goes ahead and, like, does it without being asked. I think that is just easier for the person that's grieving.
For sure. And it probably also helps them feel, you know, seen and remembered. Because kind of, like, emotionally speaking, like a traumatic event, like what you've gone through. I think of in Sri Lanka when they had that tsunami come through, and it just wiped everything out, just annihilated. But it's like, so that happens, and then you go, oh, that's going to be, you know, years and years of cleanup and rebuild and all this. And all that is very true with a traumatic loss. But there's also, like we talked about before, parallel lives. So there's all of that tsunami and the cleanup and all that. Yet there's this parallel life of, like, oh, still have kids that need a bath. Still have a job that you have to do. Still got to get that oil changed. So there's no time built in life to just go, I'm going to take the next year off from everything. And just kind of deal with what I need to. That we don't get that. The sun comes up the very next day. It's like, okay, get at it. And we're just like, what? So having someone just come in and help with either end of that, the tsunami cleanup or the daily grind, you could see where that would be incredibly beneficial. So that's what other people can do. What do you advise or recommend or suggest that people do for themselves? What are some, like, ways? Is it a bath at nighttime? We talked about getting out in the sun, which is incredibly helpful.
I think for me, first thing is, like, just getting outside. And then I think, you know, finding ways to have me time. And, you know, being a mom of 2 very small children, that's a lot harder than I think if, you know, your kids are in middle school or maybe even late elementary school, like when they can, you know, fend for themselves a little bit. But, like, allowing yourself to have time away from responsibilities and allowing yourself to, I don't know, get a massage, go for a walk in silence, do whatever brings you joy. I think that does wonders. And I wish I was a little bit better about that. But this year my goal has been to allow myself to have me time and focus on myself, because I have not been. And I think you you are a better version of yourself when you do take time to focus on yourself and do what brings you joy and what fills your cup instead of pouring from an empty cup, and it's just incredibly draining.
Would you agree that it could be a good idea to have some of those healthy habits in place before a crisis happens, so that's already maybe something to draw from that feels more normal versus someone then going, oh, I feel guilty if I'm going to go get a massage, golly, how can I do that when, so maybe having some of those.
Yeah, and I think, I agree, like having that already in place, and I think for me that was just so hard because I wanted to keep home peaceful, and I didn't want to have to rely on somebody else to watch Emmy. But I do think just in general, like, we do need to take time to focus on ourselves even before a crisis like this, just so those habits are in place, and it's not like you're having a fresh start and having to figure this out for the first time.
Especially for people like you who are natural nurturers. I mean, you're a wonderful mom, and you also have a job that is very caring, very giving, very selfless. As a nurse, you guys are community heroes all day long in my book. And for someone who's a nurturer, that can be especially tough, I think, to say, I matter, I need to do this just for, it benefits no one but me right now. And that's okay.
Right.
And that's okay. So I think we could all maybe do a little bit better job of practicing some of that self-care before the storm hits. Because trying to figure it out in the process, that could be overwhelming. Yeah, for sure. Given your situation where you were already coming from the peacemaker role, there were already things, that were extra required of you. It would be extra hard to do that, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah. So I'm glad you're doing them. I'm glad you're doing them. What has helped your girls? You talked about some grief therapy, some play therapy. What's been helpful for them?
When your kids are so small, I think as far as though, like, other than the play therapy, trying to keep some sense of normalcy in their day-to-day helps. Just like I think, I'm very much I like to have a plan, and I don't really like change. So, like, when all this happened, this was like, oh my gosh, my life is upended. But I think trying to keep a sense of, as much normal as can be. And I think because their ages they're just so young. Like, Abigail will have no idea what it's like to have a dad at such a young age. And Emmy, I think because we've been living with my parents since David died, she's had, like, my dad and my brother have been there. So she's had not necessarily a dad there, but like a fatherly male figure there, that I think that's helped. But I think, like, having family that will help and, like, be there for you, I think that helps a lot. Yeah.
And I've seen some pictures online of her with her uncles on her dad's side. Yeah. That's been great to see the two families really both coming on each side of you to go, okay, we're going to rally and do this together.
And I think that's what's been so good is, like, our families even before this were close, that, like, and I'm part of a widows group through church, and one thing that they've said is, like, a year out, they feel like, I'm the youngest by like 20 years, like, there's this big age gap, but like, what they have found is, like, a year out, it's a little awkward being around their in-laws, but, like, for me, it has not been that way. And I don't think it ever will be awkward, just because we were close to begin with, and we do weekly FaceTime chats. So it's like, and I want them to be part of the girls' lives that just because David's gone doesn't mean they have to be gone too, kind
That's
of
right.
thing. So
That's
yeah.
right. Oh, that's great. That is great. Allowing that circle to stay tight.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's healing for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked a little bit about holidays. It goes from being really hard,
Yeah.
and now, we're approaching a new year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does that feel like when you think about all the things to come?
Mm-hmm.
Even just the Friday night
Mm-hmm.
at home. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when you look forward, how are you reconciling the past, the present, and the future?
So that the first year, I think, like, each holiday in itself is almost a different grief.
That's really good. Actually, that's really, really good. Each holiday is a different kind of grief.
It's just, and they can hit you so differently. Like, if Mother's Day happens to fall right close to when the death happened versus Christmas in December, Mother's Day might be totally fine and Christmas might be like horrible. And I think, as you're going through grief, it's that first year is just crazy. And every holiday just hits you different. But I can see such growth since that first year, and it's just crazy to like think like, wow, we're coming up on 2 years since he died, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it feels like a lifetime ago, but then it also feels like, wow, it just happened, kind of thing. And it's weird being able to like feel both. But this second year, it's, you just, I don't know, you see the strength of how much you've grown, and yeah, I don't know, you're just stronger. That first year, you just feel so weak.
And that's understandable and okay, and
it's
normal.
It's also fresh, yeah.
Absolutely. As we start to wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
what would you tell someone with depression or who has a family member suffering with depression? What would you say to them?
My big things since David has passed: tell somebody. Don't sit in your depression and not tell anybody, because if you're like David, you look totally fine on the outside and you have this great disguise, and no one knows. Have a friend or family member that's like really good about checking in on you and asking you like the hard stuff, and like, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? I think counseling is wonderful. I really wanted David to go more. He was we did it twice, and he was like, I think I'm good. And I'm like, I think you need more. And I think just having a really good support system are big things that people with depression need. And I think also educating, like being the person on the other side, not being the person struggling with depression, but being like, for me, like the spouse of somebody struggling with depression, or like a friend of somebody struggling with depression. Do your research on what is appropriate and not appropriate to say when somebody confides in you that they are struggling with depression. What not to say would be, oh, no, you're not. Like, really? That's like the worst thing to say. Where I think, telling them, the person struggling with depression, like, I'm really sorry you're struggling with depression. I am here for you. I want you to, like, tell me when you're having a bad day, or what I can do to make life a little bit easier for you. I think that is much better. So I think it goes both ways, like the person struggling with depression, but the person who has either a friend or a loved one struggling with depression. You both have to be open and honest, because if the person struggling with depression isn't open and honest, people may have zero clue that you're struggling with, and I think your loved ones really do want to help you, even if it may come across not the right way at first, I think there is this deep desire, though, to be there for that person struggling with depression.
And maybe the heart intent shines through, even if the words are janky and awkward for sure. And you touched on someone contemplating suicide. So are there, in your experience, are there indicators at all when you look back? Like, is there any precursors you could warn someone else about?
So for David, there was none. And I think that was kind of hard. Was like, this completely blindsided me. Like, sometimes if somebody has a plan and they've been contemplating committing suicide, they start getting rid of things. They do like last kind of visits with family. It's like they're kind of getting rid of stuff, not necessarily obviously, but kind of slowly they're getting rid of some things, and like maybe not making any plans. And I think for me that was the hard part, was like David's suicide was so out of the blue. It like, he had made plans with a friend for that weekend, and then we were supposed to have like a family day on Sunday, and like he was excited about all that, and like he had ordered some guitar stuff that showed up like after he died. Like it was obvious, and he didn't write a note. Like I there was no note. He didn't write a note. And so for me, I think that was so hard, was it was so irrational.
Yeah. So you can go from someone having a clear exit strategy, working that plan, to someone just spontaneously, completely making a non-reversible choice.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, those are really good tips. Thank you for sharing those. One more question. I know you have been so generous with your time and your heart. Could you share a word of hope or advice to other people who have suffered traumatic loss?
So one thing I love that Pastor Alex said, look back with gratitude and look forward with joy, but I want to add, with hopeful anticipation.
Yeah.
I think if you don't have hope, you lose your sense of purpose. So for me, it's being able to focus on my girls and then have a hope for a brighter future. And like I said, it's not that we're moving on, it's we're moving forward. And being able to allow yourself to feel joy, even when it's hard or you feel like you shouldn't, letting yourself feel that. And I brought a book, but it's a book that I gave to Emmy for Christmas. Sorry. And even though it's a kid's book, I think sometimes like children's books are so applicable to adults too. So I wanted to read. It's short, it's not very long. It's something that can like help. So it's called Maybe, and it's a story about the endless potential in all of us. Have you ever wondered why you are here? You are the only you there ever has been or ever will be. You have so much to offer. Maybe you will invent something that no one has ever seen before. Maybe you will build things that reach high into the sky. Your life is yours. Try as many things as you can try. See as much as you can see. Wherever you go, take your hopes, pack your dreams, and never forget. It is on journeys that discoveries are made. Maybe you will help others to see the beauty in each day. Or maybe you will lift cheering crowds onto their feet. Do everything with love, follow your heart, and see where it leads you. Maybe you are here to shine a light into places that have been dark for far too long. Maybe you will speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. Maybe you are here to help in ways that only you can. There will be struggles, there will be fears, and it won't always be easy. At times, it will feel really hard, and you might make a mess of things. You may fall down. You may fail. But you will also get back up, and you will rise a little stronger and a little taller. Because there really is more inside you than you know. And this world needs your gifts, your talents, your big ideas. And maybe you are just getting started. What if you are only scratching the surface of what you can do and who you can be? What if you have talents you haven't discovered yet? There is something powerful, even magical about you. You already have everything it takes to do big things. Maybe you have no idea just how good you really can be. And maybe you don't know how much you matter. But maybe, just maybe, the world has been waiting centuries for someone exactly like you. One thing is for sure, you are here. And because you are here, anything is possible.
What a beautiful.
It's probably the best children's book I've ever found.
Ever. Hands down. Yeah. Wow, and we will put the book and its author in the show notes so people can go find that as well. What a powerful word. Mm-hmm. Speaking life.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what more someone could do to someone than speak life and love into them. Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing that. I'm sure you guys read that a lot. Yeah. I was glancing at the illustrations, and it's a
really
beautiful book.
Yeah.
Beautiful book, yeah. Thank you. Like, I needed to hear that today, too.
Well, like I said, it's like, I feel like children's books, sometimes it's like, they even just have the right message, and it's simplified enough that it's even what adults need to hear.
Yes, that would be like a 200-page self-help book for adults. Yeah. I resonate with the children's version much better, honestly. Yeah. And speaking of writing, you recently spoke to Turning 30 and what entering a new decade means to you. And as I read it, I thought, I know she's expressing her heart and her thoughts, but it sounds like almost a prayer. Would it be okay if we end our time with that today?
Yes.
Would you rather read it or me?
I can read it.
That's great.
And myself.
And we'll add this in the show notes as well, so people can personalize it for themselves.
Okay. 30. A new decade, a new beginning, a new outlook on life. I'm stepping into my 30s with a very different perspective than I did in my 20s. In my 20s, I was naive. I dated my one and only boyfriend, graduated college, became a nurse, was blissfully engaged and married, traveled, became a mother, and also became a widow. Lord, I'm saying goodbye to the happiest and yet most painful decade of my life, but believing that there is abundant joy in life that lies ahead. I'm entering my 30s with open hands, open to change, open to growth, open to new dreams, open to continued healing, open to finding love again, open to embracing all that life has to offer, open to finding the beautiful potential of what is hiding just beneath the surface. May this year and decade be filled with hope, growth, joy, and immense gratitude and appreciation for all that you have done in my life. Ways you have provided when I was scared or worried. Ways you've showed your goodness when I thought all was lost. Ways you continually show me that you are a good and faithful God. I need only to trust you. Amen.
And I think the most appropriate words to wrap up is what you said just a minute ago. Could you say it again about looking back and looking forward, please?
So, we look back with gratitude, and we look forward with joy and hopeful anticipation.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you for gut-wrenching sharing. I know a lot of people are going to be blessed by hearing your story, and we appreciate your vulnerability and your openness and your honesty, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And we love you. We love your girls.
Thank you.
We love your family. And I pray the Lord will show you one day at a time what step is next. Yeah. You've been listening to Real Deep Stuff. If you'd like to continue this conversation, jump over to Facebook for the Real Deep Stuff Facebook page. As always, follow this podcast so you can save your seat at the table for the next conversation. We'll see you then.